Whoop, here we are, I guess. Yeah, okay, we get the idea. It has been over 2 years ever since the first one came out around July of 2023, and things have changed ever since the first one has surprisingly came out, in which I wanted to start off my little commentary videos that I'm currently doing as of right now, surprisingly. So yeah. Oh, and to give a heads up, this is the 13th entry of this little AOLO Rambling series that I'm basically doing, since I'm basically obligated to do this for the next 2 months within a year, in which you could get very tiring so easily, just filling up stuff over and over and over again until the point where you're just wanting to give up and end it all. We're also slowly starting to run out of ideas for your little series, but I think we get the idea here. And I guess we get the gist here because I feel like that we need to start this right now. So yeah, let's get started. Number 1. Jestrail, a railway company that operated along the Isle of Dresden area just south of Sodor, has a fleet of 280 Berkshires and 482 mountain types that would operate around the Isle of Dresden. These two types of locomotives were built by Henshaw and were sent to the Isle of Dresden to supplement the Garrett types that had been operating around the island since the first one had entered into service around the early 1900s to operate services along the coastal and mountainous areas around the island. Now with the Garretts finally being supplemented, the Berkshires and the mountain types would operate around the island, pulling goods trains and passenger trains around the parts of the island until the inevitable withdrawal in the 1960s, with their final hurrah pulling a farewell to steam excursion around May of 1966. Nowadays, there are only 2 survivors of the Berkshire types and 3 survivors of the mountain types, as they were all a part of the Jestrail's heritage fleet as they would operate tourist trains around the island, with even the 2 types even operating a double-headed special on a few occasions, either on a rail festival event at Kensington or on an anniversary milestone of the railway's history. And these 2 types of engines built by Henshaw would continue to operate for Jestrail, operating tourist trains around the island alongside their fleet of preserved diesel locomotives as of today. Number 2. The WIA type was a fleet of car carrier wagons that were used by DB Cargo UK to carry cars from a manufacturing plant towards their dealerships across the mainland. These wagons were ordered by Rail Freight Distributions for their operations across the Channel Tunnel. However, they can be seen around the mainland operating for the British Railway network. For their operations across the island of Sodor, Rail Freight Distributions had decided to order a fleet of 30 WIA wagons for their operations across the island, carrying cars from the Kildare plant, while also supplementing the other fleets of car carrier wagons across the island by delivering these recently manufactured automobiles towards the car dealerships of the mainland and on the island. The WIA wagons of the island would displace a fleet of PJA car carrier wagons that were built during the 1960s and 70s from service, in which most of the PJA wagons would still be in operations but on other duties. The WIA wagons of the mainland and the island of Sodor are still in operation with us to this day, as DB Cargo UK still uses them to carry these recently manufactured cars from their car manufacturing plants towards their car dealerships. And despite its uniqueness, the WIA wagons dominate the car carrying industry, as the railways of Sodor is seemingly carrying these recently manufactured cars towards their car dealerships across both sectors of the British Isles, and they still do this to this day. Number 3. The Tidmouth Underground has 2 operational branch lines that stretch up between the northernmost sector of the underground and the southernmost sector of the underground, as they both went in 2 different destinations. For example, the South End line stretches from Churchill Street Station towards South End Station, which is a mile close from South End Beach Station. Meanwhile, at the Tidmouth Beach section of the line, there is a junction station at Callendale, in which is the start of the Brisbane branch line of the Tidmouth Underground system. This branch line connects from Callendale towards Brisbane, the northernmost point of the branch line, with a spur line that leads into Terminal 4 of the Tidmouth International Airport. Both the Brisbane and South End lines are still in operation with the Tidmouth Underground, as these services start at Tidmouth Station at the underground section of the building, as they were part of the pre-Tidmouth Underground system long before the Tidmouth Underground was even formed, with even the station building even reflecting on its pre-Tidmouth Underground history, as the station is still with us to this day alongside the underground system. And as of today, these two branch lines are still part of the Tidmouth Underground and are operating with us to this day. Number 4. Our splendid red engine himself, named James, is based on the Lancashire and Yorkshire Class 28 060 goods engines that were built by George Hughes at their Hordwich Works between 1909 and 1912 for operations around the Lancashire and Yorkshire Railway Company. These engines would receive rebuilds and would continue to operate for the Lancashire and Yorkshire. Unfortunately, the withdrawals of the Class 28s began in 1936, and by 1957, all of them had been scrapped and none of them had survived into preservation. Now, James is one of these Class 28s that was sent to Sodor around 1925. However, he's the only one of his class to be rebuilt into a 260 mogul type, and when he arrived on the island, his brake blocks were on fire and he crashed into a field. He was rebuilt by his new owners, that being the NWR, and was given a Fowler tender and a new red paint with gold stripes to make him feel happy, and so he was entered into service with these new accommodations. He would describe himself as the pride of the line and would look at his splendid red paint and would tell everyone about it, despite him being a utility engine, which means that he can pull both passengers and goods trains across the island. Despite his attitude and having a few mishaps here and there, he would still be doing the work of pulling passengers and goods trains as a utility engine, and throughout the years, he has seen through a bit of a maturity arc, in which he would accept the fact that the diesels are here to stay within the British Isles, and during the 2000s, he would learn to accept the trucks that he has been operating for, since, as stated by Sir Toby, he is a mixed traffic engine on the island of Sodor. And as a modern day, he is still seen pulling both goods and passenger trains across the island, as he is now matured, but prides himself as a really useful, splendid red engine, and he still does his work with his changed attitude to this day. Number 5. The town of Tidmouth once had a massive tramway network that spanned all across the city and would operate between the early 1900s until its closure in the mid-1950s. Now, Tidmouth isn't the only town to have an operating tramway network in the island, as Natford, Sudbury, Bickerstown, Pilgodred, and Kildane had an operating tram network that opened between the late 1800s to early 1900s and were closed in the 1950s. Following the grand opening of the Bickerstown tramway, in which it was opened in 1901, Tidmouth would install its new tramway system and would open in 1902, commencing operations around the Tidmouth Town Square area, and would later expand into other parts of Tidmouth until having a massive network around it. At its peak in the 1920s and 1930s, over 1.2 million riders would climb on board to the tramways towards their destinations. However, by the early 1950s, the tramway would have seen a bit of a decline, and by 1953, it has shown that the tramway is no use to the up-and-coming roadway systems. And so, on the 23rd of July, 1955, the last of the tramways would leave Tidmouth, bound for Tidmouth Town Square,
and it was soon abandoned and ripped up from the roadways.
Fortunately, most of the tramway stock is now being preserved at museums and at the tramway heritage railways around the island, keeping the legacy of the Southern tramways, especially in Tidmouth, alive and well. Number 6. Toby the tram engine is essentially a steam tram that had once operated on the other railway before being sent to the island and later being bought there by the Northwestern Railway. His basis, the Great Eastern Railway C53 class, is well known for operating on the Wisbech and Upwell tramway, as well as operating along the port areas of Great Yarmouth and on Ipswich, replacing the Y6s, and would operate around these parts of the Great Eastern Network even under the LNER ownership and British Railways itself until at least the 1950s, when the British Railways Class 04 began to replace them. Unfortunately, none of the C53s had survived into preservation, as all of them had been scrapped in 1955, with their old stomping grounds, the Wisbech and Upwell tramway, having been shut down of passenger service in 1927, and eventually, on the 23rd of May, 1966, was shut down for goods trains, and soon the line was ripped up. Great Eastern Railway C53 number 127, now numbered 68221, was withdrawn on the 21st of May, 1951, having operated around the docks at Great Yarmouth and on its own tramway that is a part of the Wisbech and Upwell tramway. But he'll oftentimes be traveling along the main lines to see the seaside village or to get repairs at Stratford Works. Unfortunately, this section of the tramway was shut down. However, he was saved by Sir Topham Hatt and was soon placed into service on his railway, later on giving his side plates a blue paint job. He would be seen with Henrietta and Elsie, but would sometimes go on the main line on a few occasions. However, he has always stick to Thomas's branch line, and especially on the FirePorters tramway, in which he does his job at delivering stone towards Knapford Harbour. But he would often pull passenger trains as well from time to time, and as of today, he is still seen on Thomas's branch line doing the usual jobs that a steam tram could do, and he's still operational with us to this day. Number 7. In early 2002, the Tidmouth Transportation Agency had decided to reopen a tramway network around the town of Tidmouth, and so, in early 2004, the Tidmouth Tramway was reopened for the public to serve. The Tidmouth Tramway has a similar design philosophy of the London's Tramlink. However, the only difference is that they serve a different city and or town in this case, in which these services can be commenced and operated by a transportation agency. Despite its similarities, the Tidmouth Trams, as it is now under, has served many different areas across Tidmouth, with some examples including its northern terminus of Callendale South, its southern terminus of Loughborough Beach, as well as a station that actually serves Tidmouth Station, as well as a town hall, which is located about a mile away from Tidmouth's main yards. During its peak in the year of 2006, the Tidmouth Tramways had served over 1.2 thousand passengers since its opening around 2004. However, by the end of the rush hour period of 2007, the Tidmouth Tramways had served over 1.5 million riders per day. The Tidmouth Tramways has a similar type of rolling stock similar to that of London's Tramlink. However, due to its uniqueness in that being located within an island that is just miles away from Cumbria, the Tidmouth Trams had continued to serve the entire town of Tidmouth, carrying passengers to and from their destinations, and essentially being a good alternative to the roadway networks of the public transportation system that Tidmouth already has during those times, while surprisingly also being a legacy of the original Tidmouth tramways that used to serve Tidmouth until 1955 and is still operational with us even into the modern day. Number 8. Within Crovan's Gate, there is the Crovan's Gate Mining Company, a company which associated itself in delivering slates from the Scarlowy Railway and head on towards their wharf just near Crovan's Gate. or at the harbor at Crovan. Around the early 1900s, a Nielsen box tank, which had been operating for the mining company for years, was replaced with a Manning Wattle I-Class, an 060 tank engine that was built by its namesake company for operations for the Crovan Gate Mining Company. The Manning Wattle tank engine would continue to serve for the mining company as it did its usual jobs that the Nielsen box tank was doing by this point until it was replaced in the late 1930s, which then later sold it to the Great Western Railway, in which it would be rebuilt into GWR standards and would continue to operate for the Great Western Railway until being sold off to a private owner, in which later on it was scrapped just 3 years after its rebuild in the early 1950s. Meanwhile, back on Sodor, the Andrew Barclay tank engines had replaced the Manning Wattle I-Class, as well as another engine being built by Peckett & Sons, and would continue to operate throughout the 40s and into the 1960s, in which, by the early 70s, they were already worn out, and by 1974, all of them had been replaced by the British Railways' very own Class 14s. The Class 14 would serve the Crovan Gate Mining Company as it was used as its switcher at its very own yards, just located near to the yards of the Northwestern Railway and British Railways that were operating at. However, by the late 80s to the early 90s, the Crovan Gate Mining Company was bought out by a British mining company, in which, later on in 1995, the former yards at the Crovan Gate Mining Company was shut down for good, never to be seen again within the Crovan Gate area. And in its place within the former yards is the Crovan Gate Steamworks, a locomotive repairing manufacturing company in which it specifies in repairing steam locomotives and building some newer steam locomotives for companies that have associated themselves in building replicas and new builds of steam locomotives. Being built within the former yards at the Crovan Gate Mining Company, this steam locomotive manufacturing and repair shops is still thriving with action to this very day. Number 9. The Sodor Mainland Railway did used to run their services towards Great Waterton. However, the governor of Great Waterton wanted his own private engine, and so he contacted Bear, Peacock and Company to build him a 260 Mogul that was similar in design to the New South Wales Government Railways Class Z25, and asked the company to specifically send the engine to Crovan Gate once it's finished. Meanwhile, the Sodor Mainland Railway had decided to give the governor of Great Waterton the rights to operate on their own lines, with even them donating a coach to the governor of Great Waterton for him to use. Although, the Sodor Mainland Railways still have the rights to operate towards Great Waterton, since they have technically owned the rights to all services towards Great Waterton. Nevertheless, in 1886, the private engine had arrived at Crovan Gate and soon was sent to Great Waterton, in which the locomotive would finally commence into service as the governor's very own private engine. The locomotive would be named after the town itself and would operate as the governor's private engine, with even the Sodor Mainland Railway even rebuilding her at one time, giving her a new tender and an American-styled headlamp, in which the locomotive continued to operate for the governor of Great Waterton, even lending out the engine to help out with the Sodor and Mainland Railway very own services until the town was abandoned in the early 1900s, with the townsfolk, including the mayor itself, even leaving for populous and major cities across the island, leaving the engine to be scrapped and the tender to be officially abandoned by the wayside. And basically years later, the blue tank engine just rediscovers Great Waterton, the town is fixed up and everyone just moves there and the rest is history. As of today, a model replica of the governor's very own engine named Great Waterton is now on display at the Great Waterton History Museum, and is still on display there ever since. And finally, number 10. Around the United Kingdom, there are a system of roadways that will travel through long distances, which is known as a motorway, which has existed in the United Kingdom since the 1950s. And even with the brand new and expansion of many of these motorways, the UK has approximately 2,300 miles of motorways, in which make up the 31,900 miles of the major roadways within the British mainland, with these motorway systems of the United Kingdom still being active around the modern day. The island of Sodor would also build its fleet of motorway systems around its lands, with the first ever motorway system to ever be opened, M100, being constructed between 1960 and 1962, officially making its grand opening on the 30th of July of that same year. After the initial success of M100, many other motorways would be built around the island, and by the 1970s, almost 10 motorway systems were actually built to transport people from destinations across the island, with even a connection to the mainland even being possible thanks to the Woney Bridge and/or the Jubilee Bridge.
The motorway system became largely successful around the island, with different types of vehicles using the motorways to get to destinations across the island and on the mainland, with even some parallels to the railways even being seen when the highways of Sodor were being constructed at the time. As years went on, the motorway system began to be used more and more, and by the time that the 1980s rolled out, over 2.5 road vehicles were using the highway every day to get to destinations across the island and on the mainland, as I stated earlier. And despite its flaws, judging by a highway system around the island and on the mainland, the motorway system of the island is still in operation with us to this day, carrying cars towards their destinations across the island, also being maintained by the British firm that helped it to create the motorway system in the island in the first place, with the motorway system still being in use as of today along the island of Sodor as well as the mainland.
And I guess that's about it. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this 13th entry of this series that I'm basically obligated to do. I mean, this wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the fact that I got inspired by other people that have made the similar things, just like I've done. But I feel like that sometimes things just needed to be simplified, which is why retcons and all of that is here, I guess. And, just some little things, spicing things up and make it more simplistic and a bit more fun. So yeah. Oh, and the other entries also going to be coming out around September, probably for the 200th anniversary of the Stockton and Darlington Railway, which was opened in 1825. And that's basically it, I guess. So, I'll be seeing you guys on September, and/or you can basically just watch my commentary videos, which I'm basically doing as of this year, like I stated earlier. And yeah, see ya, I guess.